Hey everybody, this is chapter 2 in our building construction textbook. And the title of the chapter is Concepts of Construction. Now I was going to do narrated PowerPoint for this, but the PowerPoint is quite lengthy and I could read out of the book to you. And so I've decided not to do that because it's very detailed. I don't want to say it's complicated. If for those of you that are familiar with the building industry, it's probably very simple for you, but there's an awful lot of terms. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it right here at this moment, but there's a quote in here it's called Branniganism, and it's on page 34 in the book at the top of the page. And Brannigan says, it has been said people judge others by, amongst other things, the way they write. When it comes to building construction terms, firefighters must traverse a spelling minefield. For example, a lintel, L-I-N-T-E-L, is a beam that carries the load over an opening. A lintel, L-E-N-T-I-L, is a bean in a soup. The word masonry, M-A-S-O-N-R-Y, it's not masonry, M-A-S-O-N-A-R-Y. Trusses have top and bottom chords, C-H-O-R-D-S, not chords, C-O-R-D-S. And so I think that kind of brought, for me anyway, all of this into focus because it's an awful lot of terms. It's a lot of terminology. But in order to speak professionally, in order to know, and we know what we're talking about when we are speaking to others, whether it is architects, those in the construction industry, maybe it's people that are coming and bringing new construction to our town, that sort of thing. We have to understand the language. And so the chapter starts off talking about the laws of physics and gravity and the fact that buildings are under force at all times, just by the mere fact of that they are above ground. Their gravity is always acting on that, and we have to understand that and how that affects. Of course, all of this, as we said in chapter 1, is about we need to understand building construction so that we understand it from a standpoint of firefighter safety, but also fire spread and or a lack thereof, or how a building is going to react under fire, under the stresses of fire. Obviously, buildings are not built to have them burn. And so, but we have to understand how that affects the whole process. So to understand the difference between stress and strain when we're talking about those forces, and compression, tension, torsion, and shear forces, what those differences are. And then, of course, the many and varied types of loads. And I think that that's a real important piece. Dead loads, live loads, impact loads, static loads, repeated loads, wind loads. It talks a lot about wind loads, concentrated loads, axial loads, and then of course fire loads. And that's not the only one that we're concerned with. So understanding how those different loads work together, understand how they affect a building's collapse or how it is going to react. And then he discusses all of the structural elements of a building, beams, columns, arches, walls, all the different kinds of beams, all the different kinds of columns, and of which there are a lot, and the reasons for those, how beams will react, how all of it interacts together, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Cantilever, needle, suspended, transfer, joist, overhanging, and how beams are loaded. And then he talks a lot about trusses. Of course, we talk about lightweight construction, but trusses they have cords and struts and ties, are viewed as a web. All of those sorts of concepts and the problems with trusses and how trusses react in fire, again, is something that we need to know. And then columns, the different types of columns and the terminology that is used with those columns, an I-beam versus an H-beam. Again, it's about being professional in our terminology, because if we call something the wrong thing, it's not that somebody, it's not necessarily how we look, but referring to it in with a wrong term, it may confuse people. It may give a lack of understanding to the situation. So to know the different types of columns, the different types of walls and walls and walls and tons of walls, cantilever walls, of course, those are kind of scary in and of themselves. Walls being breached and how that can be, that can impact the integrity of the wall. And then, of course, different styles of roofs and arches and frames and all that kind of thing. How are these things connected together? Trusses are glued. Some trusses today are glued, and which is a very scary concept. And so understanding how they are connected, gusset plates, gang nails, and how they fail, because it's the connections that fail that are going to increase that chance of collapse. Not just under fire, but under different kinds of loads. The chapter talks about a particular theater in Washington, D.C., where they had like 28 inches of snow and the roof collapsed during a movie or during a play. And people were killed, like a lot of people. I think 96, I think, is what the book said. So understanding how standing water, the water from fire suppression, understanding how that is going to affect the collapse of the building. It's all about, learning all of these concepts. And I encourage you to read the book, underline. I think I may kind of throw up a little pop quiz here about the different types, some of the terminology, some of the key terms that we need to know in order to understand building construction. I think when we think about building construction as firefighters, we think of the 5 types of building construction, and that's all we need to know. And that's really not true. They talk about a little bit about fire resistive, and nothing is fireproof. Keep that in mind as well. What is it about construction concepts that can make a building more resistive to fire than others? Most of the buildings that we encounter, I say that, not really knowing that for a fact, but I would guess that most of the buildings that we encounter are not considered fire resistant. And so we really have to know how buildings react. We have to know how they're put together, and the different types of ways they can be put together, so that when they begin to unravel, as in with a fire or natural disasters, that we can understand how to keep ourselves safe. The book at the beginning, I believe, mentions that a lot of times our survey, the description of a building may not is just kind of not very intense. Now, no one expects you to, I don't think, to use a lot of these terms when you're giving your first arrival size up. But I think we need to know these things, and I think it's important, especially as you go through your career as a firefighter, and to understand how these things. And to me, a lot of this is visual. I don't have a cache of pictures for building construction. Your book has some great pictures. I would encourage you to look at those. If you run across buildings that have great examples of some of the things that we're talking about, please snap a picture with your phone. You can send it to me to my email or post it to the site. There should be a place on there to post pictures. If not, I'm going to check and make sure that there is. And that way we can all look at those and we can begin to build this this collection of building construction pictures, because I really think that that helps us understand it, is when we can see it visually, and help us understand its purpose and understand what it does. So with that said, spend some time in chapter 2. Go through the power. You're going to find that by going through the PowerPoint, it's just going to list like the different kinds of loads. It's not going to give you that description. So use the PowerPoint as well as the book, underline, highlight, however you want to do it, because I really think that there's also the key terms at the back of the chapter that can help you as well. Also at the back of the chapter, there's something called tactical considerations. It's at the end of every chapter. And I can't remember if I told you that in chapter 1 or not, but look at those things, because there's a lot of them in this particular chapter, because that's where, to me, that's the application of what the chapter's talking about, is when we apply it to our tactics, then it becomes more real to us. So look at those things as well. And like I say, I'm probably going to throw up I guess it's not a pop quiz if I tell you about it, but a little, maybe just a matching for terms, so that we can make sure that some of these terms are straight in our head. So if you have any questions or any problems with this, let me know. You also have, I believe, a discussion assignment that goes along with this. So perhaps after you read the chapter, then you look at that discussion assignment, we could kind of sort through some of these terms in that discussion as well. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, thanks so much for your time.